Ballot Measure 131 explores an alternate voting method for Colorado's primary and general elections, technically called instant runoff voting, but to stick with the proposition's wording, we will be calling it ranked choice voting.
So, what are we voting on? We're going to spend the next few minutes telling you about the context, pros, and cons of voting yes on this landmark voting policy.
Colorado already has a partially open primary, so registered independent voters have the ability to vote in the primary, but they have to choose a partisan ballot. In a partisan primary, you only end up with one partisan candidate from each party that goes onto the general election. In the general election, you choose one candidate with no ranking, and the candidate with the most votes wins. As you can see, in the general election, candidates from minor parties have the ability to be added on to general election ballot without ever having to go through the primary election.
So, if ballot proposition 131 were to be put in place, there would be changes starting with the primary. In this new all-candidate primary, every voter would get the same ballot on which they could write any candidate. There would not be a separate primary for each of the major parties. The general election, however, would have the top 4 choices. Parties would be listed on the ballot, however, voters would not see it as divided and would instead see it by name of person.
In the real scenario, there would be 4 choices in the general. However, for the purposes of this video, we'll be using just 3. Suppose that candidate A is chocolate, B is chocolate chip, and C is peanut butter.
During the first round of voting, no candidate earned a majority, and thus no candidate won. However, candidate B, or chocolate chip in this case, has the least amount of votes, so it would be eliminated. After its elimination, the second choices would be taken into consideration. After they are added, we can see that candidate A, or chocolate, has a majority and thus is the winner. Ranked choice voting is used in over 120 countries, statewide in Maine, and many U.S. cities as a means to empower voters and foster better elections.
Ranked choice voting Colorado remains neutral on the issue.
If it passes, it would change the Congress, Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, Treasurer, the State Board of Education, and University of Colorado elections to this system.
Next, I'll talk about the pros and cons of Proposition 131. First, the pros. Voters can earn freedom to vote for the candidates they like the best without fear of helping elect the candidates they like the least. Ranked choice voting Colorado says that by implementing ranked choice voting in cities and counties across Colorado, we can give voters more choice and more voice in our elections. And by taking parties out of the primary, it is thought to decrease the polarization in our government and lead ideally to more moderate candidates being elected. For the cons, there are many elected officials and parties that have come out against this, some of them being Republican Rep. Lauren Boebert and the Green Party. Boebert doesn't like it because very extreme candidates on either side are going to have a harder time getting elected in this new system that focuses so much on trying to win the middle. Secondary parties like the Green Party don't like it because they no longer automatically get onto ballots and need to win the primary like everyone else. They argue that this proposition would boost wealthy candidates in an unfair advantage. Under the new proposition, it would make it so the parties can no longer choose who they want on the primary and can't give the same amount of funding as they could in the past to that person, making it harder for someone not wealthy to compete with someone who has the funds to have a huge campaign budget out of their own pockets. Critics also point out that it would be possible to game the system, like how a senator in California boosted a Republican candidate in the primaries, so he didn't have to go against another Democrat, making it easy for him to win in an overwhelmingly Democratic state.
Colorado Ballot Measure 131 will be a complete change on how voting looks. Everything from the primary through to the general will follow a different system.
In other words, if 131 is voted yes, things will change. If voted no, voting will stay as it is. The biggest pros are increased voter engagement and potential for decreased polarization.
The biggest cons are potential for groups to game the system and potential for wealthier candidates to have a major advantage in elections.
Make sure you get out and vote on this important issue.